I would say that it's your birth and you're the one who gets to decide what that means about you as a person.
Welcome to the Vibrantly You podcast. We're your hosts, Megan Martineau
and Caitlin Cipriano. In this podcast, we talk about fitness and nutrition on your motherhood journey. Whether you are trying to conceive, pregnant, postpartum, or beyond, you are welcome here.
Nothing is off limits, and our goal is to support you in this important season of life so that you can feel vibrantly you. As a reminder, this information is not medical advice. Please see the show notes for more details. Welcome back to the Vibrantly You podcast. Today, we are thrilled to introduce you to our guest, Nicole Scheitlin, to talk to us about C-section birth and recovery. Nicole is the founder of Strong Mama Wellness. She has her degree in exercise movement science and is a certified pre- and postnatal fitness specialist, an exercise physiologist, and women's health coach. She's a mom of 3 and has had 3 C-sections with all of her babies. We are really excited to dive into this conversation. So to start off, Nicole, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your first labor and birth experience and what led to that first C-section.
Yes, first off, thank you for having me, Megan and Caitlin. Super excited to be here and chat with you all about this. Yeah, 3 C-sections, that's right. So a little bit about me. As Megan said, I'm a mom of 3. I have 2 boys and a girl, all C-section births. And yeah, you listed out my credentials well with being a health coach. I've been in the fitness industry for over a decade now, I think about 12 years. And I've been a pre and postnatal fitness specialist for 5, almost 6 of those years now, and truly fell into it when my first pregnancy just kind of threw me for a loop. I went into that pregnancy really thinking that it was going to be easy, like with a fitness background, it would be easy to work out. But, as we find out when we get into our pregnancy, it's a lot of misleading advice, a lot of general vague advice that we're given, and there's just not much support. And so that's kind of what led me into coaching women and getting certified kind of first for myself, just to learn and to grow in that experience and get myself through the pregnancy a little bit more smoothly because I wanted to stay active. It just was not easy. It was not happening. I was nervous about what was safe and what wasn't. But anyways, that education really helped me mid-pregnancy to kind of get through the rest of it and take me up to that first birth experience, which leading into that a little bit. So got up to about 41 weeks pregnant with my first and had trained for this birth, had trained, the way that I train my clients, really wanted to have either a natural delivery, but at the very least a vaginal birth. I had never intended to have a C-section. It's never my plan. And so we got to about 41 weeks with that pregnancy and I got induced. I think I might have been pressured into the induction a little bit as a first-time mom. And that induction was very long. I was at 41 weeks and it was a long induction. Baby did not want to come out. And I think I labored for close to 30 hours before it was just not progressing. I think I didn't get, past 3 centimeters after going down the whole road of interventions. And so there ended up being some complications towards the end of that induction that led to the C-section. They kind of labeled it as failure to progress. And so we went to the operating room, got a C-section. At this point, I had so many, I don't even know, medications probably going through my body that the experience, I barely remember at this point. It was very fuzzy because of just some complications towards the end and all the interventions that had been done. So that in a nutshell is how that first pregnancy went, or first birth went, and how it led to a C-section.
Yeah, I feel like that's such a common, going back to how you got into this work, such a common experience, I feel like, that I hear from so many people in the birth space, not even just fitness, but I feel like even for Caitlin, being a mom is what led her down like perinatal nutrition, or like I've heard from doulas or, people like that are like, oh, it was my own experience that led me down this path, which I think is so cool. And
Mhm.
yeah, that's a long labor that had to
Yeah.
feel like really frustrating and like defeating to get to that point and to be labeled like failure to progress. Like,
Yeah.
I hate that they say that because then that makes you feel like you failed.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what led to so many of the feelings of failure. I know that we'll probably talk about this, but yeah, just from an emotional standpoint, the initial thought was, oh my gosh, I didn't expect this. I didn't even see this as an option. And now it's labeled as failure to progress. Like, what's wrong with my body? Like, what's
Hmm.
wrong with me? And so I can see that, affecting a lot of other women too, that's just, it doesn't feel good to have that put on you, especially when you're not expecting it to happen in the first place.
I think the whole system around like perinatal and women's health is the structure of things needs so much change. I mean, the three of us do come from a health and fitness background. My background's sort of similar to yours. Like I was in sort of like a generalization, before I became more certified in perinatal. And so we feel uncomfortable not quite knowing how to approach a pregnancy from a continuation with fitness. And so how do people, feel when they don't even necessarily have that background? It's so challenging to come in and then, the whole like hospital decision making side when you're in labor is a completely different discussion. But I think there's just so much work to do.
There is. And the other piece of that too is like, I think we lean so much on our providers because that's what we're told to do. Like we see them monthly and then more frequently in that pregnancy. And we ask them every single question. And, with nutrition and with fitness and those types of things that are actually not within their scope to get specific with. And so I think it helps to know that they are the manager of your pregnancy, so to speak. Well, you're the manager, but they kind of like are the expert on the pregnancy, but like the specifics of nutrition and fitness and things like that, that's a, totally different ball game and may not be within their scope.
Yeah, and then we're totally left to figure it out on our own and
Mhm.
Googling or looking to
Yeah.
social media and just feeling like a total sense of overwhelm and confusion.
Yeah, that's
And
exactly
then,
what I hear all the time. It's just overwhelmed, confused. Yeah.
yeah, and then often just like paralyzed, and you're like, forget it. I'm just not going to do anything
Mhm.
because this is too much.
Yeah.
So, with your C-section, obviously was not planned, even though you trained throughout your pregnancy, hoping for a vaginal birth. How did that impact your recovery? What was your recovery like?
Oof. Yeah, that first one it was tough because as we were just saying, you're not really expecting that. I think that in any of the classes that I had taken, the birth classes that I had taken, which were all through my hospital, which was mistake number one, um, we had not planned for the outcome of a cesarean. If it were a vaginal delivery, I had a couple tips and tools, but not really even for that. So yeah, the recovery was hard. I didn't know that first off the C-section was happening, and then once it did happen, I was basically sent home with a couple little guidelines of, stay off your feet, don't lift more than your baby, these blanket statements that were given. I'm sure you ladies can relate. And it was very I don't know the right word for it. It was defeating. It was confusing. I felt kind of hopeless. Like I didn't know what to do. My body felt pretty broken. My energy was pretty broken from just feeling like a failure. And so the recovery process was hard. I mean, my core was super weak. I couldn't connect to my pelvic floor. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was right and wrong. So it was definitely difficult, the most difficult with the first one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can relate to that because my first birth was a planned C-section. And I even feel like with it being planned and knowing what I was going into, I still felt all those feelings that you described because while they prepared me for the actual surgery, right? Like told me what was going to happen, like what to expect when I was in the hospital. No one talked about what recovery was going to look like. So that was like pretty blindsiding too. But I do feel like going into it planned, I at least like kind of knew what to expect. So for you to go in just being like, oh, this is happening, here you go, that had to feel so intense.
Yeah. Yeah, intense is a good word for it, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then just trying to figure out how to deal with the scar. Like what's the best healing strategy? Oh, I have to massage my scar now. I had never heard of that in my life. Like, how do we do this? So there was just so much unknown that I had to kind of learn as I went. And granted, going through the certification program with pronatal that I did with pre and postnatal fitness, I had a little bit of background like going into it. So that really helped to have that knowledge because I completed that certification like 2 months before I was due with my baby. So granted, I had a little bit to go off of, but there was still there's still a lot of unknown that I had to work through on my own.
I think that your description is so probably like a common experience I mean, yes, absolutely with C-section, but I just don't feel like providers set us up with like uh, the expectations that often happen. And so I do think it just really like creates this maybe not like sense of like guilt, but like those kind of feelings you're talking about in terms of like feeling broken or like why wasn't I like aware that this was a thing, like I had definitely had, I didn't have a C-section, but I did have some complications with my first birth, and there was things like that where I was like, why did I not know that this was a possibility? And it just, I think, also leads into this like conversation that we're having around a lot of like maternal like mental health concerns postpartum, is just like not having that like adequate knowledge and adequate expectations of what things look like. And I often feel like there's very little like middle ground in this conversation too, because when you hear from moms, I feel like it's either like, oh, everything was like perfect, or then you get like labeled as trying to fear monger moms if you are actually like sharing your real experience. Like maybe you guys feel the same way, I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like the two extremes are very real of exactly what you just said.
So um going like transitioning into um with your second and like third pregnancy and labor experiences, was having a like VBAC ever like on the table for you with either of those, or did you know right away that you wanted to have C-sections with either of those pregnancies?
Yeah, with the second baby, I definitely wanted a VBAC. Like, and I'll get to the third in a second, but with my second baby, with him, I really wanted a VBAC. So I, did all the things again that I knew to do in terms of preparing my body for it, and was waiting and waiting and waiting. And I think my babies just don't love to come out of my body on their due date, which I get it. It's a very vague estimation. But for me, it was getting to the point where it was just getting to be past my personal comfort zone. And I just had these like gut feelings. And I just want everybody to know that like my way is not necessarily like the right decision for everybody. So I'm going to share kind of like how I went through the thought process of this, but it doesn't make it right or wrong. I think it's just super subjective to each personal individual experience. And for me, it came down to like researching, but also like what was my gut telling me? Like what was my brain and body like okay with? And for me, I got a little past 41 weeks, and I probably could have held out longer um based on research, all that stuff. But for me, it was just kind of like, okay, 41 and a half weeks is like my personal cutoff. Like that's going to be it. I'm going to prepare for a VBAC, be ready for it if he decides to come sooner, and was just very hopeful for that. And I think I scheduled a C-section when I was at like the 41-week mark. I was like, this is going to be my cutoff at 41 and a half weeks. And, I'm going to have to live with that. And the way I lived with that was doing a lot of journaling, like, because there is such a stigma around C-sections. Like, the C-section rate is going up in the United States. At least we're at like 30% of births are C-sections. And so I think there's just a lot of stigma around it, especially working in the birth space. So for me to choose that, there was a lot of emotion around it. There was a lot of, again, feelings of failure that I had to kind of work through preemptively before scheduling that C-section. But yes, it was definitely on the table up until a certain point, and that was just my personal comfort zone. So I scheduled a C-section and went through with it, and had to work through those feelings of failure preemptively by just, asking myself, like, what does this type of birth mean about me? Like, and then just kind of measuring the risk versus reward for me. Like, is it worth waiting for me? Is it worth enough? And to me, in that moment, in that time frame, at that point, my gut was saying no, like just go for the C-section. So that's kind of what made up my mind.
Yeah, I love that you said you just really paid attention to what your gut said and what you felt comfortable with, especially because, like you said, with your first, it kind of felt like there was more outside pressure and
Yeah.
people kind of like telling you what to do. Where it sounds like this time you were really able to like turn inward and be like, okay, what am I comfortable with? Like, what feels good for me and for my baby, even though it wasn't necessarily what you were hoping for, you were still able to trust yourself in that moment, which I think is really empowering.
Yeah, trust is a good word for it. I didn't even think to use that, but yeah, I think it took a bit to build that trust of like, okay, this is what I want and that's okay. So yeah, I think it does take a sec to get to that trusting point after you've done the research, the possibilities, the risks on both ends, the risk of a C-section, the risk of trying for a VBAC, and just with the traumatic experience I had with the first, to me, it wasn't worth risking that again. To some people it is. To some people it is. To me, it was not in that moment. So yeah. And then with the third, to kind of continue on answering that question, it was a VBAC, or a VBAC after 2 cesareans was definitely on the table until about 32 weeks. And I should say I wasn't as gung ho as I was with the second. With the third, I was just busier. I had two kids, 4-year-old and almost 2-year-old, and they keep me so busy. And oh, I kept saying, if she comes on time, like I will go for that VBAC. And I did all the physical prep work that I felt like I could do for that, and did the research. And then around 32 weeks, there was something that just like changed in my mind again, where I was just like, is it worth it? Like weighing the risks versus rewards. And there's still a pretty high risk. I did the research, VBAC links. VBAC link was a pretty good resource for me in terms of what the outcome was, the percentage for success outcome. I couldn't get my wording right, but 60 to 80%, I think, is still kind of the range for VBAC. And then it goes down a little bit for VBAC after 2 cesarean. And so it's like, okay, like it's a little less likely, but it's still pretty likely. Like the odds are still in my favor. But again, it was just kind of a risk versus reward game for me. And so I think it was an easier decision this time to just say, we're going to go with the cesarean. I ended up scheduling it earlier. We went at 39 weeks because I just fully decided, like, I'm not even going to try for a VBAC this time. And I was okay with it. Like I trusted myself. Like my gut was like, this is fine. Like I'm it's hard to say it, but like I was comfortable with a C-section at that point. Like whether or not it is the right thing to do, and it's different per person. But for me, it was the right thing to do for this third pregnancy, for this third baby. So 39, I scheduled it for 39 weeks, and I was happy that I did, and I don't regret it.
I think you did a nice job of talking through some of those like differences that you experienced like emotionally with the like planned versus like unplanned C-section in your first. Can you talk a little bit about like the physical side a little bit and any like specific prep work, especially after your like initial kiddo, the other two?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it's all pretty similar, depending, like, no matter what type of birth you're having. I think for me, like, when I truly decided with this third baby that I was not gonna go for a VBAC, like I did want a C-section towards the end. I didn't do as much of like the push prep, like the birth prep work in terms of like practicing labor positions and things like that. It was more important for me to prepare for recovery, which is something I also did with my second, like the second and the third. It was a lot of strength training to prevent aches and pains towards the end of the pregnancy so that I could go into the birth feeling as good as possible. And then also having a really good foundation and connection with my core and pelvic floor through breathing, pelvic floor, both activation and relaxation. And then strength training, activities of daily life, squats, deadlifts, things and movements that I'd be doing with my baby after birth to help get back to function quicker after a C-section. Because I remember with my first, and Meg, you probably relate to this too. I mean, it takes a bit to get mobile again. You are basically in a bed for several hours after the procedure, and then you are slowly returning to walking. And it's just a slow build. It's a really slow build. And so for me, it was a lot of prep work for that recovery to help get back to function quicker so that I could be present for my family, but also rest. I mean, I wasn't trying to go crazy after birth, but just wanting to smooth out the process and feel as good as possible.
Yeah, I love what you said about it being a slow build after the C-section with recovery because it's major abdominal surgery. And I think people forget that. Like, if you were to have knee surgery or something like that, like, again, it's a slow build to get back into exercise movement. And I think it's so important to remember that with a C-section as well. And like you said, a lot of the preparation is for that initial postpartum period because you are lifting your baby right away and carrying them and bending over the crib and doing all those things. So it's like the more we can practice those and strengthen, hopefully, the better the recovery will be. So do you feel like your recoveries for the second and third were easier than your recovery with the first?
Yes, 100%. They definitely were. Um, Part of it was just due to knowing what to expect, but I think that they progressively got easier each time. So with that second, I had a little bit of warning about it being a C-section, but I knew what I was going to feel like after birth. I knew that my core would feel pretty empty. I knew that I was going to need strength to return to walking and, like you said, bending over the crib, getting up and down off the floor, things like that. So retaining muscle was key. So yeah, I'd say that it definitely got easier with each subsequent C-section, both knowing what to expect and also knowing how to prepare, like knowing what the flip side would look like and what I would be doing on a daily basis. So I think having that knowledge was really helpful. And I think, like to what you have said several times, Caitlin, too, is like we're lacking that prep on the front end with all types of birth. We're lacking that education, we're lacking that knowledge. Like I wish it would have been as smooth on my third or on my first as it was on my third, but it took a couple times to really, understand the expectations and what my body would feel like. But if my provider had said, these are the outcomes, the possible outcomes of your birth, this is what you might feel like in each circumstance, each outcome, like maybe that would have helped a little bit more. I think it could have helped with the recovery and not having to learn so much through experience and feeling so broken and confused for sure.
Yeah, so I feel like I hear this a lot from people that have had multiple C-sections, that kind of like each one gets easier. And when we
Mhm.
think about what is actually physically happening, you're like, but how? Because you're still having this major surgery every time, right? But what you're saying is it sounds like knowing what to expect, having that education going into it, while it might not necessarily like physically be different, right? Like, do you think it's that emotional, knowing what to expect and the prep that makes it easier?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Because, I mean, in my first, I did the things to prepare for any outcome, right? I was still doing strength training. I was doing the same things before that first birth that I was doing before my third. So if it were just the physical prep, like it would have been very similar. But I think the lack of expectation, the lack of understanding how I would feel and what exactly to do, I think that was a key piece missing with the first time. So I think it's helpful for sure to know what to expect going into it. That way, I mean, yeah, because a lot of it is just it's not only confusion on what to do to start healing and recover because you're just told to rest, but it's also the working through the emotional side as well, working through the feelings of failure and defeat and all of that. So when that was kind of removed, when it was my choice and I trusted my path, I trusted, I was settled in my birth story, it was a lot easier to just kind of move forward from that.
Yeah, and I wonder too if it helps knowing like I'm not broken. My body is not broken. It's not going to be like this forever. I can heal. I can get stronger. Kind of takes away those feelings of like despair that a lot of people feel after that first C-section because you're like, yeah, this feels like a lot in the moment. Like my body went through a lot, but like I know I can come out of this
Mm-hmm.
stronger.
Yeah, that's you kind of have the confidence
Yeah.
after the first one. You're like, okay, I've been through this hard thing. I can do this hard thing again.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
So I think this is really helpful given like your lived experience with these births, but what advice would you give to moms out there that might be trying to decide between a VBAC and a repeat C-section?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did a podcast episode on this as well on my podcast, like after I had gone through with that second baby, that like first planned C-section. And it was a mix of research based and also a gut decision. So for me, I made sure I had the facts. And again, the VBAC link podcast was helpful just to hear like other positive VBAC birth stories. VBAC link was helpful for resources. So I would say do your research, have the facts, have the numbers, know what your odds are. And then also have this other piece of like knowing like what it means to you. And to some people, having a VBAC, having a vaginal delivery might be like the thing. Like that is the thing that they want to have. And that's totally cool. Um, and so I think it's just helpful to understand and really write down. Like I think for me, journaling was just the thing that helped me. And I would write down, I wrote the question at the top of the page, why do I want a VBAC? And I just like brain dumped, why do I want a VBAC? All the reasons. And then I did another question of why would I not want to be back? I wrote down all the things. And so just navigating, getting all my thoughts out of my head onto paper and looking at it was really helpful in kind of weighing my risk versus reward scenario in my brain. Like, is going through with this, are the risks of a planned C-section greater than the risk of maybe a VBAC or a failed VBAC, I guess. I don't want to say failed VBAC, but an unsuccessful VBAC. And so everyone's answer is just going to be different there. And I think that each woman will need to truly understand where her heart is and what it means to her. And so I don't have a super clear answer, but I would just get your thoughts out and know that there's not a wrong decision. Like, birth is birth. And I think for me, it was just really leaning into trusting that whatever decision it was the right path for me, you know? And yeah, there is some, I don't want to say regret. I don't regret it. I think there's just some like grievance of I will never experience a vaginal delivery, but there's also this settled feeling of like, I did choose this. I trust that that was the right decision. That's what my heart really told me to do. And so, yeah, in a nutshell, I'd say journal it out, get your thoughts into paper, and then navigate through that and just find a place where you feel settled. You may not feel like totally 100% on either direction, but find a place where you feel somewhat settled and you're being pulled in one direction.
I think that's really good guidance because I think you're bringing in like evidence-based, right, knowledge, but also that really nice, like intuitive side of what is going to be right for you as the individual. And that's going to vary from person to person, which is the most helpful advice you can have because not one birth experience is going to be like the other. So I love that.
So, getting to the end here of this episode, but if someone has decided that they want to go ahead with the planned C-section, like they've done their research, they've talked to their provider, they have listened to their gut, like done all of this internal work like you've mentioned, but they're maybe just still feeling a little bit of that stigma around C-sections and they're still just like, just struggling with the weight of that decision. Do you have any words of encouragement for those moms?
Yeah, I would say that it's your birth and you're the one who gets to decide what that means about you as a person. I think that we have all of these thoughts and ideas and perceptions that are kind of given to us from others, from social media, from other people's birth stories. And we kind of take that in and let that factor into what we quote unquote should do. And I think you're the only one who gets to determine what your decision means about you. Like, are you going to let the decision to have a C-section mean that you're a failure? Or are we going to let this C-section decision make you feel more empowered? Like, I'm in control of this. I trust my decision. I trust my body. So either way, I think that any birth is good. And I think getting to the point where you truly believe that is really important.
Yeah, I love that so much. So, as we wrap this up, thank you so much, Nicole, for joining us today. This was such a great conversation. And I hope if anyone listening who is, thinking about having a repeat C-section or trying to make that choice between a VBAC or a C-section, that this was really helpful and encouraging for them. If people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, ladies. You can find me on Instagram at Strong Mama Wellness. It's MAMA for mama. I also have a podcast, Strong Mama Podcast, and website is strongmamawellnessco.com. So yeah, feel free to DM me on Instagram if you have any questions. I love talking with people about this decision and not influencing you one way or another. But if you want to just bounce thoughts and ideas, I am happy to do that. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. Okay, that wraps up today's episode, and we will be back next week.